What's up, guys? Will Gibbons here, and welcome to the first episode of Real Talk. Now, I get quite a few questions on Instagram and email asking me about career advice and questions about how to get into the industry, portfolio questions, hardware questions, software questions, my background, things like that. And while I'm happy to respond to those, I figured if I created a video series in which I talk on these subjects, it would give me more room to address these questions more deeply and share them with more people. So as I get busier, it's harder and harder to respond to these questions. So I'm going to try to build this sort of casual Q&A type video that will go out each week. I'm aiming for every Friday, but you guys let me know if you want something different. Currently my rendering tutorials go live every Monday. I thought this would be a nice way to end the week on a more casual note. And speaking of casual, these are not going to be polished, produced, edited, really. Again, I don't have time to do that, unfortunately, so I'm gonna have to be pretty, so these are gonna be fairly raw, so that's why I wanna call it Real Talk. I mean, it might not be perfect, I may fumble my words, but you know what, we're all human here. So if you don't know, I used to have a podcast, and I really enjoyed doing that. That was a platform that allowed me to talk with other designers and creatives for about an hour or two at a time and really go deep into subjects and hear different perspectives, which I really appreciated. But again, it just takes time, and I really have to be careful with what I commit to. And having a platform or a podcast where I had to interview people and coordinate schedules and time zones and things like that was just really, really difficult. So this is something I can just flip on the camera and do whenever I have a moment. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. So this first one, I figured we'd start with some low-hanging fruit, something nice and easy, which is going to be my background, professionally speaking. So a lot of times people say, hey, I see what you're doing. I think it's interesting. I would like to do what you're doing. What steps did you take to get there? And so, while those are kind of two different questions, one is more about strategy and how to get to your goal, which may be a better topic for another video. I'm just going to share my story with you for now, and maybe that'll give you some ideas or inspiration. Or if you feel like you're stuck, maybe hearing of things I ran into, certain struggles, that might encourage you to keep going, hopefully. So, where do we begin? So, I grew up in Michigan, the Midwest, and I grew up not using computers a whole lot. I spent most of my time outside. I was always doing BMX and skateboarding and snowboarding and biking and stupid stuff. I grew up in the woods, so we were out making forts, playing airsoft and paintball, and I was in a Boy Scout, so I did like backpacking and like adventure stuff. Again, I was not a computer nerd. I didn't actually, believe it or not, it was actually close to, I think, my senior year in high school that I learned the difference between a Macintosh and a PC. I didn't know anything about computers, and we didn't even have internet at home that was like fast enough or reliable to use really until I like left for college. So I really did not grow up using the computer other than to edit videos. So I have a little bit of experience with video editing, but it was the type of thing where we would borrow mom's and dad's video camera and we would go film each other trying to do tricks on our bikes or snowboards or whatever it would be, and then we would go make edits on the computer. We tried to import the footage and find some music and create like a title, and then and that was pretty much it. And like, they were terrible, you know, but it was a lot of fun, and that really scratched an itch I had for creativity and communication and expression. And I think to this day, I'm starting to get more and more into film, and CG is just one element of that, of course, but photography and video production and stuff. I really love that for its storytelling and the technical nerdiness of operating a camera and editing. I love editing. It's a lot of fun. So anyway, that's what I did kind of in high school. And I also was into drawing and art. I went to a really small school that didn't have a lot of big programs, but it did have a pretty strong art program, and I had a great art teacher who was very encouraging and open-minded, and even entered a lot of her students' artwork into contests for them and helped them get things like scholarships and really give these kids a direction and some encouragement when they might not have had that from home. Now, I'm fortunate to have had parents who really did encourage me. I did have that support at home, which was awesome. So I did as many art classes as I could in high school. It was like independent study, painting, drawing, photography, as much as I could do. And by the time I went to college, I got my portfolio together and I interviewed at a number of schools. And my dad is an engineer, or has kind of an engineering mind and a background in it. And my mom is a college writing professor. So I kind of had this combination of a strength in communication, thanks to my mom, and an analytical brain, thanks to my dad. And then I was this in between where I really wanted to do artsy things. Like, I was most inspired by things like concept art, kind of movie art, kind of fantasy imagery, and things like Warhammer and some of these like RPG, like tabletop games and things like that. And I liked making things with my hands. So I had this kind of mixed interest in creative stuff. And my parents, not coming from an arts background, were a little, maybe a little intimidated or concerned about the job prospects for someone who would go to an art school. Like, I wasn't this prodigy. I didn't create amazing work. I wasn't this great like painter or anything. So like, they were probably scratching their head going like, if he's going to go to this expensive private art school, like, what's he going to do as a career? And I totally get that. I didn't even know myself. So my dad, he brought this idea of industrial design to me. I didn't know what it was. He worked at Hayworth, which was a manufacturer of furniture. And Hayworth is, if you haven't heard of it, they're kind of in the ring of like Steelcase, Herman Miller, Hayworth. Like, they're the three big furniture manufacturers. So office furniture, seating, like that type of stuff. And it's high-end stuff. So he talked to some of the industrial designers at Hayworth and suggested I come along and meet them and see what they do at work. And I remember one day going in and shadowing this guy, and he showed me Rhino, like 3D app, modeling program that a lot of you probably use. And it kind of blew my mind. It seemed, the UI was ugly, so I was pretty unimpressed with it. It seemed dry and engineering-like, with all those gray lines and like kind of an ugly user interface. When I compared that to people who are doing like digital paintings and concept art, it seemed boring. But at the same time, I thought, well, if my parents are going to help me pay for college, this seemed like a good compromise. Something where there was money, there was opportunity, and hard skills, not just say like abstract painting. And again, nothing against abstract painting. I have great friends who make a living doing painting, and I have utmost respect. It's just that for me, this seemed like the safe path, and that's what we kind of agreed on. So I went to school at CCS, which is in Detroit. So I moved to Detroit and I started taking classes in industrial design, and I liked it a lot. It was challenging though, and they had really high expectations for their students, and they made it very clear. I had many professors who said, if you're not pulling all-nighters, you're not working hard enough. It was not the healthiest environment, but they really wanted to turn their students into like professionals who really cared enough about what they did that they would actually pour themselves into it. And this is a really hard concept to install in someone who's like 18 years old, as I was, or 19 years old or whatever. A lot of people aren't ready for it. I mean, looking back, I feel like, in your early 20s, maybe you understand work ethic, but like right out of high school, at least I didn't quite get it. It was, so I feel like I did the bare minimum to get good grades, which I did. I did get good grades, but the problem was I didn't really pour myself into it. I wasn't like sucked into my projects like some people were, up around the clock, being really creative and really understanding the design process. Analytically, I got it, but like I didn't really, when I did a project, I didn't really know how to kind of invent design features and improve upon products. I was kind of more in this mindset of like collaging things. So I'd be like, oh, if the prompt was design a car, I remember that was one of our first exercises, like design a car, which a lot of these guys love, but I wasn't into that. I didn't know anything about cars. And so my car design was just like, it looked like a really ugly Pontiac vibe with like flip down TV screens and like, I don't know, like it had like a door that opened a certain way, and it had like bigger tires and like cool looking rims and stuff. Like it was stylized and it was like accessorized, but I didn't design anything new. So I found it, and I got like torn up on that project. Like I remember my professor like making it pretty clear that it sucked, like bad. But I kind of also knew it. That was a frustrating thing. I knew I wasn't designing well, but it took, yeah, so it took hearing that to really understand that I needed to work on those skills. Okay, so fast forward, I keep doing my classes, I get better at my foundational work, I get, I'm getting progressively better at design because I keep working at it. I'm picking up some of the software, I'm learning about 3D modeling and a little bit of rendering and stuff. And at that point, I think I first got introduced to Rhino in college, and I thought that was pretty cool because I, from a few years prior, remembered that I saw that when I went and shadowed that guy at my dad's, the company my dad worked at. So that was kind of cool, and getting into 3D and starting to really visualize stuff when my drawing skills were not that strong. I thought 3D was quite cool. It was just, I was slow at it. That was the hard part. And again, a lot of my classmates came into design school with family members or parents or someone they knew who were designers. So they came in with this experience and this knowledge of things like software and what types of design, what different fields there were, and like they came in with more foundational skills than I ever did. Some of them knew CAD already and stuff, which was crazy to me because I didn't even really know anything about it. So the other interesting thing is I got into bicycles big time. So my love for BMX and stuff kind of shifted and grew. When I was in college, Detroit had a really big fixed gear scene. And I know like that might sound silly, you might roll your eyes if you're a big time cyclist, but the fixie scene was really big in Detroit. And there were tons of people riding these really cool single speed or fixed gear bikes with wild colors and crazy parts. And I loved the fact that without a lot of money, I could go and buy a crummy old bike and then do some work on it, like get hands-on and like build it and modify it and then ride it around town. And that was my transportation. And Detroit's a great city to ride around in. So I did that, and I got big into the fixed gear scene. Like I said, I participated in alley cat races, and I started to meet the community of people. I hung out at the local bike shops. I was on a first name basis with them. And I just really got to like meet people, and that became something I enjoyed outside of school. School was hard, it was work, but I really enjoyed just this community of bike riders and meeting people and doing something just totally different, and socializing outside of school. So that was cool. And I did more and more of it. And as I got into it, I actually found a group of guys who would meet up and ride regularly. And they were doing crazy things like doing tricks on these bikes. And that was really cool to me because it was like, oh, back to my BMX days, we were doing tricks again, but we were doing them on these bikes that weren't really intended for doing tricks on. And we would meet up and like ride all through the night. Like no joke, I'd go home at like 4:30 a.m., get a couple hours of sleep, then go to class. So I hung out with these guys riding bikes all night, and they were making like edits, like filming and editing these together, and we were all progressing and riding and pushing each other. So the last couple years of my college career, I got so into this biking and uploading videos online and interacting with people online through different blogs and YouTube and other places. And I got better and I made more videos, and we kept doing that. And then I eventually started traveling parts of the country to go do contests. I remember we did, south in like Virginia, and then all the way out in Wisconsin and all sorts of other places. And I would meet up in person with these people who I'd only known of online. And it was crazy. You'd come together and there'd be like 50 people who knew each other through online and some early social media. And then And then we'd spend a weekend having a blast together, writing, doing contests and making edits and stuff. And it was so fun. And so through that passion of writing, I eventually got sponsored and did a little traveling, writing for doing contests and stuff, and even some magazine type stuff, advertisement type stuff. And through that passion, I was able to do some of my my last couple of projects in school were industrial design projects around the bicycling scene. So I designed like a frame and some bike components and some multi-tools and stuff that I wish I had. So the reason this seems like a tangent that I think is important is I found something that I was passionate about that really meant a lot to me. And I let that passion then fuel my design, and it made my work better. I was more invested. I spent so much more time on my projects because I cared about what I was designing. That is a big takeaway here, because I think anyone who is early on in their career or struggling to connect with this decision they've made, it's that you need to find something you love, and then you need to use your technical skills and focus them on applying them to the thing you love. So with that, I kind of closed out my college experience, and I felt burnt out from the industrial design stuff, but I graduated. I had, I don't know, I'd say an average, maybe a little bit below average portfolio. It was okay. And then I spent the next 2.5 months cold calling, emailing, everything I could do to try to get a job. So I went and moved back with my parents. I didn't have any money. I was flat broke, of course. I was super in debt. And I would go sit at the coffee shop, get like 1 cup of coffee, and I'd sit there for like 8 hours a day on the email, on the blogs, on the phone, on the looking at job leads, and like it was pretty demoralizing. It was tough. I know it seems like a long journey at that point, but when you graduate college, you just have to go out and get that first job. Now, I did get a job interview offer from a local car company, but I so was not interested in cars that I declined. And I didn't tell my parents because I was super nervous that like they'd be pissed that like I didn't take this opportunity, but I didn't want to work in that industry. So that kind of fueled me, that taking that risk is also what made me feel guilty and made me push harder to get the job I wanted. So I really wanted to work in the cycling industry. And I eventually found out through this website called Malachi that there is an action sports trade show in Huntington Beach every year, or at least there was. I don't know, they're probably still doing it. And my thoughts were that maybe if I could, when I saw the list of the companies that were going to be there, they're like skateboard clothing companies, accessory companies, headphone companies, like all the cool companies. And in Huntington Beach, which is a beautiful place, of course. And I'd never been there. I didn't know if this would work or not, but I saw that like, I thought, man, if I could go and network there, maybe I could get a job. I don't know. It was like a Hail Mary. And so what I did was I filled out an application to be a vendor at the trade show. I didn't even really know about trade shows back then, but basically a vendor is somebody who sets up a booth and then sells their products at this trade show. So if you were like a store, like a skate shop, you would go to this show and find out what brands you wanted to carry for the next season. So I filled out an application to go as like a vendor. And I left one of the spots blank, like company name or something like that. I don't know. And I submitted it, and I was just like, oh, whatever. I wasn't serious. I didn't think anything was going to happen. But this woman called me back and said, hey, got your application, but missing a couple pieces of information. And I told her, I like froze. At first I panicked, and then I was like, and then I was just like, so here's the thing. I'm a college student. I'm flat broke. I'm trying to get a job. I feel like this would be a good networking opportunity. I don't have any money. I don't have a company or anything like that. Like, is there any way I could go somehow? Could you get me a pass to go to the show somehow? Like, I'd be forever grateful, you know? And she was like kind of shocked by it. She was like kind of surprised. And she's like, give me a minute. Let me see what I can do. And I'm on hold and like super nervous and stuff. And then later she's like, okay, I've waived the application fee. I've put you in. You've got a spot. Your name's on the list. Good luck. Like, I hope you get a job. And I was just like, I was dumbstruck. I was like, what on earth just happened? this woman just like out of the kindness of her heart, like took a chance and was like, yeah, I'll let this guy in. Who knows? And it was insane. So I told I came down to eat dinner with my parents, and I told them, I'm like, well, I'm gonna go to this show in Huntington Beach, California, to do some networking and hopefully get a job. And they're like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah, so I explained to them, and then I'm like, but I don't have any money to get there. So like I asked if I could borrow money from them for a plane ticket to go out there, and they thankfully were kind enough to say, yeah, okay, we'll loan you the money for the plane ticket. So next thing I knew, I was on a flight to Huntington Beach. It was amazing. I got there, I checked in, I checked out the booth, I talked around, and all the while I'm still hustling. I'm still sending out emails, trying to set up appointments for interviews and stuff. And I really got to understand and see the culture of Southern California, which I hadn't really been to as an adult, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with it immediately. And while I was there, craziest thing ever, I got a response from one of the companies I reached out to, which was Felt Bicycles, and they were in Irvine at the time, Orange County. And the guy who basically responded to me, he was like, hey, can you come in for a meeting? President of the company would like to sit in and discuss and see what we can do. And I'm like, again, I was like dumbstruck and shocked. I was like, yeah, I'll be there, absolutely. Like, so he set up a meeting for the next day. And here's the crazy thing: they didn't know I didn't live locally. I didn't disclose that. I didn't let them know I was from out of state or anything. And so I go in for the appointment, and I'm super nervous again, and I'm in this like one of the conference rooms at this bicycle company, and like my jaw was on the floor after I saw like the lobby with all the crazy $15,000 bicycles and stuff. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And I have this interview, probably the most nervous I've been in my entire life. I basically shared some portfolio pieces and talked about my skills to these guys, and they agreed to give me a test project. And then in about a month, I'd get back to them and show them what I did, and they'd see if they were interested. And I think I left that meeting and I still didn't tell them that I lived in Michigan. I don't think they knew that at that time. I left the meeting, I was like ecstatic, my head was like spinning. And so I felt pretty good about that prospect, and the trade show was done. So I went back to Michigan and I got started on that design project. So I get back to Michigan and I build out this project. I do this test project, and I set up a meeting, and I had to go to the library because we didn't have good internet at that time at home, as I mentioned. And I had to sit at the public library and use their conference like internet system so I could do like a conference and show them my screen and share the project with them. And they were like, yeah, we're interested. We think you understand what we want you to do and that type of thing, and you have some skills. And I got a job offer, and I was grateful for it. I didn't care what I got paid. I just wanted a job, and I wanted to do something that I was interested in. So with my job offer, I accepted it, and I took my crummy little car and I packed everything I owned, which was hardly anything, in the back of it. And my dad, thankfully, sat in the passenger seat, and we drove across the country from Michigan to California. And what happened was I arranged to rent a bedroom from one of the people who worked at this bicycle company at Felt. So he was kind enough. There was a guy who worked there who had a spare bedroom that he rented me for, dirt cheap. I want to say like $400 a month. Whereas, rent in Southern California is very expensive. So I was really grateful for that. And I worked at Felt Bicycles for 3 years. Now, it was amazing, a great opportunity, absolutely great, perfect first opportunity for me. I got to kind of like take a break from industrial design and computer work, which I was, again, burnt out on. And I got really deep into cycling. I was already big into riding bikes and BMX and fixed gear stuff, but I got into riding proper road bicycles and mountain bikes and understanding the mechanics of bicycles, shifting gears, material science and technologies that go into it. And I worked basically as the guy who would work with the engineers. I would learn what the engineers were doing to design their new products and frames and stuff. And then I would in the marketing department, I would sit and I would create these documents that would take the crazy high end and somewhat technical inventions that these engineers would do, and then I would turn those into manuals and documents and marketing material that your average consumer could understand and appreciate. So I was in charge of communicating the value and the difference between a bicycle that costs $12,000 versus one that costs $2,000, because to the eye they can look identical, but in fact as a rider they're totally different. So I did that, and I became quite knowledgeable on bicycles and technology that this company created. And I loved it a lot. But eventually I started to miss doing things like design work. I was doing mostly 2D. I was doing a lot of photography, from some video, some editing, creating banners. I spent most of my days doing like some hand sketches, and then I worked in InDesign to create loads and loads of owner's manuals, instructions, and documents. Again, honing these skills of communication and visual communication, which is largely what I do today, just using different software. So toward the end of my stay at Felt, I decided I want to get back into design. So I started looking at what I would have to do to freelance. And randomly, I ended up, I don't know how I came across this, but I wanted to create cooler images than just photography for my instruction manuals. So I started getting CAD models from the engineering team, and then I wanted to make them look nice. So I think I downloaded like a demo of KeyShot, because I knew that I knew of KeyShot from college, but again, I didn't use it much in school, and I hadn't used it since. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get back into KeyShot. So I watched like a webinar, and I was so surprised to find out that they were just down the road. Like their headquarters was in Tustin. I was working in Irvine, and that was just cool. So I started playing around with KeyShot a little bit, and then when I decided that I wanted to freelance, I basically decided that was going to be my next career move. Was I need to start freelancing and build up a portfolio again. So something other than 2D work, which is what I did at Felt. So again, as I mentioned, I wasn't making a whole ton of money. I was living outside of my means, and my job just wasn't paying much for where I was living and what I was doing. So I had to borrow money from my parents again. Again, they saved me again, but I borrowed money to buy a high-end workstation, because all I had was like an old laptop at that time. So I borrowed money and I bought a workstation from Box, Boxx. They do pretty high-grade enterprise-type workstations. And then I also had to borrow money for a KeyShot license as well, because before that I was using just a pirated version. So I was like, if I'm going to charge money for this, I'm going to do things correct. I'm gonna do them legally. So I got the software, and I created a Craigslist ad explaining what I could do and what work I was looking for. And the first gig I got, thankfully I didn't have to wait around too long. This guy contacted me, and it was a guy who created a product for the kind of fitness industry, sort of. He created this interesting little scoop/funnel that would allow you to take your like supplements for like protein or pre-workout and like put it in just a standard water bottle without making a mess. And so I did a lot of work for him, helping create practically a website, all of his marketing images, point of sale design, cardboard boxes, packaging, social media, everything. And I charged almost nothing. I didn't make money. I charged him almost nothing, and I worked so much. I spent so much time learning just how to work freelance, how to render, how to do CAD, all this stuff that I needed to do. And so that was just a big learning experience. And then he referred me to his friend after that job was done. He referred me to his buddy, who is also an entrepreneur, who is a little higher up, had a company that was making more money. And he hired me to do some work for him. And then that was, again, sort of in the fitness industry. I was doing some accessories for him, 3D modeling and rendering primarily, because he wanted his website to have nicer looking images that he didn't want to rely on photography for. So I'm like, okay, I can do rendering. And and I spent so much time on that job, those jobs. It was really just me learning how to work and do like a freelance type environment, that type of thing. I was also working full time at my main job. So it's not like I was making a bunch of money on the side. It's that I was sacrificing all my free time outside of work to do this. And at some point it got bad. I was working, 2 freelance jobs plus a full-time job. I wasn't sleeping. It was way too, I was in over my head. I didn't realize how much I had overcommitted myself and how long I should have told the client each job would take. So that was crazy. I had to push through that, and it was a big learning experience. This was around 2013, I want to say. I haven't really given years for a time frame, but so I graduated college in 2011. I moved out to California late 2011, and then in 2014, I think 2014, we moved away from California. So I had met my girlfriend, who is now my fiance, in Southern California. And she wanted to go to med school. So we thought that was an awesome idea. I encouraged her to apply, and she did. She studied for almost a year, and then she took this really hard test that would allow her to get into medical school. And then she got she did well, and then she got into med school and applied all over, and she got accepted into a small school in Pennsylvania. Not somewhere either of us really wanted to live or go to. But you know what? Sometimes you just have to go where you have to go. So we moved for her school to southern Pennsylvania, south of like Pittsburgh, about an hour. And I decided at that point, I had already been freelancing on the side, and I decided I would go full-time freelance. When my jobs kind of dried up after I moved away, that was very tough. I tried to get gigs in Pittsburgh, but it was too far away. I couldn't really make anything line up. I did more networking and stuff, but ultimately I did get a gig where there was a startup over there in Pittsburgh. I went to like startup night or something, or yeah. Some guy on LinkedIn invited me to this event, and I'm like, yeah, why not? Let's go. And it was like a 24-hour like design challenge weekend, that type of thing. And I did it, and I met someone there, and he ended up needing a product design. He had an idea, but he needed this thing like designed. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I worked remotely out of my living room, and at this time I was building a big kind of, I was spending a lot of time like online, like building a presence, trying to create various like personal branding websites, and trying to build like a following on LinkedIn, and like I was trying to do Instagram. I started doing Instagram, like my design account that I have now, I started in 2014 doing like drawing and ID sketching. And I bought like a book on like SolidWorks modeling, and I worked through it. And like I was really trying to hammer all those technical skills and get to this professional level that I didn't really feel like I polished while I was in college. College introduced me to these skills, but I spent time for a couple years in Pennsylvania really developing these skills to the point of where I was quite comfortable and a lot faster, more proficient in 3D modeling and rendering and drawing and that type of stuff. All right, so at this point, I did whatever sort of gigs that came my way. At one point, I started working for a different startup, and again, an online networking opportunity introduced me to these people, and it was serious for a while. I flew around the country with them on meetings and came up with lots of concepts, did a lot of modeling and rendering. But when it became clear that the company wasn't really going to go anywhere, wasn't going to get up off the ground, after about 9 months, I jumped ship and just, again, tried to pick up any gigs I could. And at this point, I started getting really involved in KeyShot. I was active on the KeyShot forum, which is a really nice community, and I started partaking in events like design, like speed challenges. I think, I'm trying to remember, I know Esben was involved in them, and there were a couple other guys early on who would we'd set like a 2-hour time limit, and we'd see what we could design or render and then we would share our results and vote, and it was a lot of fun. And I got to really get involved in the KeyShot community through this online forum. Eventually I started making KeyShot tutorials on YouTube, which some of them are old now, but they got a lot of views, and eventually the guys at Luxion saw them, and that was kind of cool. And one of the guys, Richard, one of my good friends, he reached out to me randomly on Instagram. He said, "Hey, I'm going to be in your area. Do you want to grab a beer?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And this was in the wintertime, and we met up and had a beer. He told me what he did, and he said he was a trainer for Luxion. He would train teams of designers and engineers how to use software, specifically KeyShot. And I thought that was amazing. I was like, that would be the best job ever. So I was super excited to hear that he did that. Later, as he got busier, about a year later, he reached back out and said, "Hey, what about joining our team? Would you be interested in this?" I was like, oh my God, this opportunity fell out of the sky, golden opportunity. So I did an interview and things worked out and they offered me a job. And this was when my fiance's her schooling was wrapping up in Pennsylvania. So the next part of her schooling was rotations. And that meant we had to live in New York City for 2 years. And it just so happens that Richard, the guy who was working at Luxion doing the training at the time, had an office in Brooklyn, New York. And so I flew out to meet him. And I moved out. We moved out, and that from that point on, I stopped freelancing and I started working at Luxion, and I started to learn how to do KeyShot and train and teach others how to do it. So at that point, for the next almost 3 years, I traveled extensively doing KeyShot. I went to trade shows, and we went into other companies and customers who had KeyShot. I would do demos. I did online webinars, tutorials, and I worked with the dev team to learn, share feedback and test new features and stuff. And that's where I learned all of what I know about rendering. I spent the time, and I really had to know all the nuances and all the answers, because when I went to do training, companies if you were going to be there showing them how to use the software, they expected you to know the answers. So I really had to know my stuff then, and I owe a big credit to Luxion and Richard and those guys for teaching me what I know now. So after about 3 years of that, I really wanted to open myself up to opportunities to take on more freelance work and work with other companies instead of just teaching. And the other big thing was I was traveling a lot. I was traveling every other week, and that takes a toll on you. Let me tell you, that is really, really tough. Thankfully, my fiance was so busy with her rotations for those 2 years that she didn't feel like she was being neglected. So we had these almost separate lives where we were doing our careers. But yeah, once she was done with her rotations, the next part of her job was residency. A med school is a long journey if you haven't picked up on that. But so she had to do her residency. She applied and she got into a program in Loma Linda, California, which is where we live right now. So we're about an hour and a half east of LA, and that's where we work. So I moved out here with her, and then that is, I lived out here for a few months, and then I told Luxion that I was going to be moving on. And that's when I left and decided to start my own company, Gibbons Design. And this was just, again, like I said, an opportunity to be able to engage with other companies and work on other design projects, as well as give me enough time to where I wasn't traveling all the time and I could work on personal projects and things I was really passionate about. So that was last year. I want to say it's not a year yet. It's probably coming up 10 months or so ago I left. And since then, I've been doing my own thing. And I've been engaging and working with other companies on a freelance basis and creating, on the side, as much educational content as I can to give back to everybody who's helped me along the way. I also really like the fact that I can interact with people online. Working from home as a freelancer, some might find it lonely or isolating, and I can't deny that I don't spend as much time interacting with people face to face, but the tools that we have today and being able to interact online is what allows me to really, again, feel connected and help other people. I'm definitely interested in discussing other topics I think I'll probably try to condense and have some bullet points to go off of in the future. That way I don't ramble so long and I can give you more of an abbreviated answers to a lot of these questions. But yeah, guys, geez, thanks for this, and tune in next week and we'll be on another subject, and hopefully these will get better. But yeah, until next time, guys, happy rendering.